kind trucker stopped to help a lonely woman on a dark road on a rainy night. But the next morning, a knock at his door revealed a chilling truth. His mistake had sealed his fate, or so they thought. Then, he made one bold move that changed everything. The rain came down in relentless sheets, turning the deserted highway into a blur of silver streaks under the dim glow of the streetlights. James Carter, a weary truck driver in his late 40s, gripped the steering wheel tightly, his tired eyes scanning the road ahead. It had been a long night, and he was eager to finish his last delivery in Denver, Colorado, before heading home. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on him, but he pushed through, knowing that rest would have to wait. The rhythmic drumming of the rain against the windshield was almost hypnotic. The radio played softly in the background, a country tune he barely registered. The loneliness of the road was nothing new to James. He had spent years behind the wheel, making long hauls across the country. But tonight, something felt different. A strange unease crept up his spine, though he couldn't quite place why. As he rounded a bend in the highway, his headlights caught something, or rather someone, on the side of the road. A woman stood there, drenched and shivering, her coat clutched tightly around her shoulders. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and she made no effort to wave him down, simply standing there as if resigned to the storm's fury. James's first instinct was to keep driving. He had heard too many stories about roadside traps, people pretending to be stranded, only for an ambush to follow. He was a cautious man, and life had taught him to be careful. But something about her made him hesitate. She wasn't approaching the road or waving frantically like someone desperate for help. She just stood there, waiting, as if she had nowhere else to go. He exhaled sharply, debating with himself. He could ignore her and move on. It wasn't his problem. But then, an image of Lisa, his late wife, flashed in his mind. She had always been the kind of person who believed in helping others, no matter the circumstances. "If you ever see someone who needs help, don't just turn away," she had once told him. Lisa would have stopped. With a resigned sigh, James slowed the truck and pulled over a few feet ahead. Rolling down the passenger side window just enough to speak, he called out, "You all right, ma'am?" The woman turned her head, her deep brown eyes wide with relief. "My car broke down a few miles back," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I just need to get to my friend's house. It's not far from here." James hesitated. He couldn't see a car anywhere nearby. That nagging suspicion returned, but she looked genuinely cold and helpless. He wasn't the kind of man to leave someone stranded in the middle of nowhere, especially not in this weather. "Get in before you freeze to death," he finally said, pushing open the door. Without hesitation, she climbed in, shivering as she pulled the door shut. James handed her a dry rag from the glove compartment. "It's not much, but you can dry off a little." "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I really appreciate this." James nodded but kept his focus on the road as he pulled back onto the highway. The silence in the truck was filled only by the hum of the engine and the sound of raindrops hitting the windshield. He stole a quick glance at her. She looked to be in her mid-30s, her features sharp but kind. "So, where's your friend's place?" he asked. "Oak Ridge Street," she said, "just a few miles down the road." James nodded, focusing on the wet pavement ahead. He wasn't much for small talk, but something about the quiet presence of this woman made him uneasy and curious at the same time. After a few moments, she spoke again, her voice soft but direct. "You seem like someone with a lot on his mind." James let out a small chuckle. Truck drivers always have a lot on their minds. Too much time alone makes you think too much. She tilted her head slightly. "Anything specific?" For a brief moment, James considered brushing her off, but something about tonight made him feel different. Maybe it was the rain, or maybe it was the loneliness that had been pressing down on him for years. He exhaled. "Just thinking about my wife, Lisa. She passed away a few years ago." The woman's expression softened. "I'm really sorry." James tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "We had a good life. She was my everything. Losing her, well, life hasn't felt the same since." A brief silence followed before the woman said something unexpected. "I believe she's still with you." James glanced at her, surprised. "You sound pretty sure about that." "I am," she said with quiet confidence. "Love like that doesn't just disappear." James didn't know how to respond. No one had said something like that to him before. Most people gave him awkward condolences or empty reassurances. But this felt different, almost as if she knew something he didn't. They drove in silence for the next few miles. The rain had softened into a drizzle by the time James turned onto Oak Ridge Street. The road was dimly lit, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. "This is close enough," the woman suddenly said. James frowned. "You sure? I can drop you at the exact house." She shook her head. "No, it's fine. My friend's place is just around the corner. I'd rather walk the rest of the way." Something about that didn't sit right with him, but she looked so sure of herself. With a sigh, he put the truck in park. "All right, stay safe." She smiled at him, and for the first time that night, he noticed how warm and knowing her smile was. "Thank you, James. Really." Before he could respond, she opened the door and stepped out into the misty night. He watched as she walked down the street, disappearing around the corner. James shook his head, still troubled by something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Why had she been out in the storm with no car in sight? Why had she refused a direct drop-off? His gut told him something wasn't adding up, but he was too tired to dwell on it. With a heavy sigh, he shifted gears and drove home, unaware that his simple act of kindness was about to change his life forever. James woke up earlier than usual, though he had no reason to. It was his day off, and after a long night on the road, he had planned to sleep in. But something felt off. There was a strange energy in the air, something that made his stomach tighten before he even opened his eyes. Rolling over with a groan, he grabbed his phone from the nightstand. 7:45 a.m. He sighed, rubbing his tired face. It was too early for visitors, yet he could hear an unusual sound outside. A steady, low hum, growing louder by the second. Frowning, James pushed himself out of bed and walked toward the window. He pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside, and what he saw made his breath hitch. A sleek black sedan was parked in front of his small, aging house. It was out of place, too polished, too expensive for a neighborhood like his. Standing beside it was a well-dressed chauffeur, his posture formal, hands clasped neatly in front of him. Behind him stood 3 men in dark suits, their expressions unreadable. They weren't looking around or waiting impatiently. They were waiting for him. James's heartbeat quickened. What the hell was this? He had seen things like this in movies, and they never ended well. His first thought was that they had the wrong house. Maybe some rich guy down the street was expecting company. But when the chauffeur suddenly turned his gaze directly toward James's window, his stomach clenched. The knock on the door came next. Not aggressive but firm, controlled. James hesitated before exhaling sharply and heading for the door. When he opened it, the chauffeur offered a polite nod. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." James stiffened. They knew his name. That was enough to put him on edge. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. The chauffeur gave a small, professional smile. "I am here on behalf of Miss Anna Mitchell. She would like to meet with you." James blinked. Anna? He hadn't expected to hear that name again so soon. In fact, after last night, he had assumed he'd never see her again. The chauffeur reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photograph, handing it to James. He took it cautiously, and his pulse quickened when he saw Anna's face staring back at him, the same woman from last night. "You've got to be kidding me," James muttered under his breath. The chauffeur remained composed. "Miss Mitchell is waiting for you in the car. If you would be so kind as to accompany us, she would like to speak with you personally." James glanced past him at the luxury sedan, the tinted windows making it impossible to see inside. Every instinct in him told him to be careful. He didn't know who these people were, and this whole situation felt unreal. But his curiosity overpowered his hesitation. "Give me a minute," he said before stepping back inside. He threw on a clean shirt, jeans, and a jacket, splashed water on his face, and took a deep breath. He didn't know what he was walking into, but something told him his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. When he stepped outside, the chauffeur opened the car door for him. James hesitated for just a second before sliding inside. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing him into the silent, luxurious interior of the vehicle. The first thing he noticed was the soft leather seats and the faint scent of expensive cologne. The second thing was Anna, sitting elegantly across from him, looking nothing like the rain-soaked woman from the night before. She was dressed in a light blue silk blouse and tailored pants, her dark hair neatly styled. Her demeanor was calm, confident, and entirely different from the vulnerable woman he had picked up in the rain. James leaned back, crossing his arms. "Didn't expect to see you again, and definitely not like this." Anna chuckled. "I figured as much." He studied her carefully. "Mind telling me what's going on?" She exhaled, folding her hands in her lap. "First, I want to thank you. What you did last night. Not many people would have stopped." James shrugged. "I just did what any decent person would do." "That's where you're wrong," she said, meeting his gaze. "Not everyone would have helped. But you did." He narrowed his eyes slightly. "And now I'm sitting in a fancy car with a woman who clearly isn't who she said she was last night. So, why don't you tell me the truth?" Anna smiled, as if she had been expecting that question. "My full name is Anna Mitchell. My father is Henry Mitchell, owner of one of the biggest real estate and hotel chains in the country." James stiffened. That name sounded familiar. Henry Mitchell was a billionaire, his name plastered across luxury hotels and business towers. "So you're rich," he said flatly. Anna laughed softly. "That's one way to put it." James frowned. "Then why the hell were you standing in the rain like some lost traveler?" She leaned forward slightly. "Because I was looking for something, or rather someone." James's jaw tensed. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "Last night wasn't an accident, James. I wanted to see if there were still good people in the world, people who would help someone without expecting anything in return. Most people would have ignored me, but you didn't." James stared at her, his mind racing. "So what? That was some kind of test?" Anna tilted her head. "An experiment. But you weren't just a part of it, James. You proved something to me." His grip on his knee tightened. "And what exactly did I prove?" Her expression softened. "That kindness still exists, and that some people help because it's the right thing to do, not because they want something in return." James didn't know what to say. None of this felt real. After a pause, Anna reached into a sleek black folder beside her and pulled out a stack of documents. She handed them to him. James took them hesitantly, his heart pounding as his eyes scanned the pages. Then he stopped, his breath caught. These weren't just any documents. They were business proposals, investment agreements, plans for an auto repair shop. His dream. Anna's voice was gentle but firm. "I know about your dream, James. Your dream of opening your own garage. And I want to help you make it happen." James swallowed hard, unable to process what was happening. He looked up at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this?" Anna smiled. "Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness deserves the biggest reward." James felt his world tilt. He had spent his entire life surviving, never expecting anything in return for the good he did. But now, this stranger, this woman he had met only last night, was offering him the one thing he had always wanted but never thought he could have. His hands tightened around the papers. This couldn't be real, but something told him it was. James sat in stunned silence, his eyes scanning the papers in his hands. The words blurred together, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Anna sat across from him, watching his reaction carefully, her expression unreadable yet patient. The inside of the luxury car was quiet except for the soft hum of the engine. Everything about this moment felt surreal. James finally exhaled and set the papers down on his lap. He looked up at Anna, his voice low and cautious. This doesn't make sense. You don't even know me." Anna tilted her head slightly, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. That's where you're wrong, James. I know enough. James narrowed his eyes. And what exactly do you think you know? I know you've spent your life working hard, never asking for anything more than what you've earned, Anna said, her voice calm but firm. I know you lost the person you loved most and kept pushing forward even when life felt empty. I know you had a dream, but responsibilities got in the way. And I know that last night you stopped when you didn't have to. You helped someone you thought was just a stranger, expecting nothing in return. James rubbed a hand over his face, still struggling to accept the weight of what she was saying. So, because I gave you a ride in the rain, you're offering me what? A second chance at my life? Anna nodded. Yes. James let out a short, humorless chuckle. And what's the catch? There's no catch, Anna said simply. I want to help you, James. That's all. James shook his head. That's not how the world works. Nobody just gives something like this away for free. I do. Silence settled between them. James could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. This was too much. Too fast. He had spent years scraping by, watching every dollar, working through exhaustion just to stay afloat. And now, sitting in a luxury car with a woman who was offering to fund his lifelong dream, he couldn't wrap his mind around it. Anna reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the seat toward him. I don't expect an answer right now. Take some time. Think about it. James hesitated before picking up the card. It was thick, expensive to the touch. Her name was embossed in sleek silver lettering along with a phone number. Take a day, take a week, Anna continued. But whatever you do, don't let doubt be the reason you say no. James stared at the card for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. The car pulled up in front of his house. The same house he had lived in for years, small and worn but filled with memories. The reality of his life stood in stark contrast to the luxury of the vehicle he was stepping out of. James turned back to Anna before closing the door. Why me? Anna's eyes softened. Because you deserve it. And just like that, the door closed, and the car drove off, leaving James standing in the quiet morning air, his mind spinning. He spent the entire day pacing his small living room, staring at the documents over and over again. The numbers, the plans, the details, it was all real. He could have it. His own auto shop, his own business, a future he had long given up on. But was it right? Could he really accept something like this? As evening fell, James sat at his kitchen table, running his fingers over the business card. He thought about Lisa. If she were here, what would she say? He knew the answer. She would tell him to stop doubting himself. With a deep breath, James picked up his phone and dialed the number. Anna answered on the second ring. James. He closed his eyes for a second, then exhaled. I'm in. There was a pause. Then the warmth in her voice was undeniable. You won't regret this. And deep down, for the first time in a long time, James believed that. The weeks that followed moved faster than James had expected. One moment he was signing papers, and the next he was standing in an empty garage space, staring at the walls that would soon become Carter's auto garage. It was unbelievable. The reality of it still hadn't fully settled in. Anna had stayed true to her word. She introduced him to contractors, legal advisors, and business consultants, ensuring that every detail was handled smoothly. James was overwhelmed at times. There was so much to do, so many decisions to make. But for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Excitement. The garage, located on a busy street in Phoenix, Arizona, was the perfect spot. It needed work, but James could already picture the finished shop. The sign with his name, cars rolling in, customers leaving satisfied. It was his dream finally coming to life. One afternoon, as he and Anna stood outside the garage watching the workers install the sign, she turned to him with a smile. How does it feel? James exhaled slowly, taking in the sight before him. Like I'm waiting to wake up. Anna chuckled. Then let's make sure you never have to. The grand opening day arrived sooner than he expected. James barely slept the night before, his mind racing with what-ifs. What if no one showed up? What if he failed? But as the morning sun rose, His nerves were replaced with a sense of determination. By noon, people started arriving. Curious locals, drivers in need of repairs, and even old friends who had heard about the shop opening. Anna was there too, watching from a distance, her expression filled with quiet pride. James worked nonstop that day, fixing engines, changing tires, talking to customers. The exhaustion was real, but so was the sense of fulfillment. As the last customer of the day drove away, he wiped the sweat from his forehead, looking around at the garage, his garage. Anna approached him with a knowing smile. "Told you it would work out." James chuckled, shaking his head. "You're something else, you know that?" "I hear that a lot," she said, laughing. Weeks turned into months, and Carter's auto garage thrived. Word spread quickly that James was not just a skilled mechanic, but also an honest one. People trusted him. Business was booming, and soon he had to hire 2 employees to help with the growing workload. But even with success, doubt still crept in sometimes. James still struggled with the idea of receiving so much help. He wasn't used to handouts, but Anna always reminded him, this wasn't a handout. It was an opportunity, and he had earned it. One evening, as James was closing up the garage, Anna walked in holding a large envelope. "For you," she said, handing it to him. James frowned, carefully opening it. Inside was a legal document. His breath caught as he read through it. It was full ownership of Carter's auto garage. He looked up at her in shock. "Anna, what is this?" She smiled softly. "It's yours now, completely. No strings attached." James shook his head. "But you invested so much into this. I can't just—" Anna placed a hand on his shoulder, cutting him off. "You already repaid me, James. Every day when you show up and put your heart into this place. You deserve it." A lump formed in his throat. No one had ever believed in him this much. Not since Lisa. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Anna smiled. "You earned it." As the years passed, James continued to build his business, making it one of the most trusted repair shops in town. He trained a younger mechanic to take over, ensuring that his legacy would continue even after he stepped away. His story became somewhat of a legend. The man who helped a stranger on a rainy night and, in return, was given the chance of a lifetime. Even after James passed away, Carter's auto garage remained. A reminder that kindness can change a life in ways no one can predict. And somewhere, Anna still remembered that rainy night. The night that changed both of their lives forever.